It was a pleasure to have you with us in the Inner Circle.
Yeah.
But going through the Inner Circle and ICOR in general, what's the biggest takeaway from the ICOR methodology in your case?
From the ICOR methodology, it's the framework itself. I mean, the PKM, having that be a separate set of things, which I'm still trying to make work. I still haven't gotten there yet. So that's one thing. The other big thing is on the BPM side. I would say that I was very much in a no PKM. So that's one. And it was just collecting a lot of shallow thinking, disorganized. And so I can see a process. It is taking time to work through that. So I just in the last week, kind of pushed myself back into Tana, which I was previously focused on heptabase. And I'm like, you know what? That's the deep thinking. My problem's in the shallow. So I'm clipping easily a dozen articles, pieces, things like that. And they're just going into a new kind of inbox and not getting processed. But I think the biggest impact is I can see the process I'm working towards. And whether I'm jumping into Tana or, I switched to Todoist, which it's okay, I can work on it. But I'm like, I'm still chasing tasks. That's bad. So the point of it is that I shouldn't be doing that. I haven't quite spent any time or figured out Sensama yet, but planning is a big. So I think my biggest goal is to move into a planning routine. My biggest weakness is that I don't have a weekly routine. I don't have a morning routine because when I go into it, it's not the go check this because this doesn't exist. Right?
Yeah.
I started a migration to ClickUp, which I think is phenomenal. I watch their updates. They keep getting better and better. So I'm very happy with that. But the time to learn it and migrate, I get stuck and then I have to go back into work. And, I missed some deadlines because the old system and the new system wasn't in place. And then I woke up and people were like, hey, where is this deliverable? I'm like, I thought that was a month away. So I know I have to get on top of it. But
the key is here, what you're already pointing out is that you're realizing what you still need to work on.
Yes.
And the question is now, have you been able to identify this before the Inner Circle?
Well, I think working April was the Inner Circle. That was great. It's continuing that work. And I go back into the Leica Pro videos or the beginner videos and things like that. I went in, we chatted a little bit about Miro because I am doing collaborative workshops with clients. And I decided not to do that because I don't want to be clumsy in it in front of a client where I'm wasting time trying to figure out how to do something. So yeah, for each of the pieces I've prioritized because the ICOR, at least the tech stack, the principles are good. So that's really what drives me towards, and to the point that I'm trying to create an ICOR model for my work that is tailored to my industry and my work, but then can also be replicated by others in my role. So for me, it's a little different maybe than others because I'm trying to take ICOR and for, like the rest of this year, the next 6 months, get it working for me. And then from that, I'm, thinking about, okay, let me share, right, my version or adaptation of ICOR to everybody else that I coach and train and work in my business because they all have the same problem. I was at a few conferences and I mentioned, what about having just a PKM part for people in my role? And people are like, that would be an amazing thing for you to teach because everybody's struggling. I'm teaching topics, it's not process. And I think a lot of people are lacking in the process. So it continues to be really good. I think that across all of the components, I'm trying to switch most of it over, but because I didn't have them. And it's in May, in June, I just continue to work away at it. And I find that more on the PKM side than worrying about the BKM, I'm just not going to worry about it. Focusing on the BPM, not worried about the tasks. I figured that'll fall out of it. So yeah, I just keep coming back to the same principles and trying to apply them. So make the progress.
Great. So it's just great to see that you coming up with all the principles and the concepts that we teach in ICOR and that you certainly know where to place them in your system. So how was the ICOR framework where you lay out the tools in the different areas that you mentioned? So PKM, the personal knowledge management, you mentioned BPM, the business project management, BKM, the business knowledge management, all these things. How was it helping you to get the bird's eye view on your tool stack then?
I think it's useful, but one of the interesting things is that when you do your own mapping at the beginning, you don't really fully realize what those steps are. So things that should have been more in the middle, things that I am using to overlap, the more that start to live inside of the ICOR work, I'm actually realizing what I had in those mappings weren't probably accurate. And because that's just based on a quick introduction of the ICOR overall mapping my stuff, but I do look at all of my tools in that lens now. So I am remapping them. I'm trying to shut down. I've realized a few things that I thought were going to just migrate over, like click over to ClickUp, like my HubSpot for CRM. It should stay there. My CRM, I think, is going to be better suited there than it will be inside of ClickUp.
Yeah.
So, there are certain things I've definitely tried and then gone back on. I'm too clumsy in Arc. While I know it's great, I'm still too clumsy in it. And so those things kind of slow me down. It's like I tried Sansama, but it didn't really work. I haven't got into any integrations yet. So
Yeah.
I am switching between different
Which
things.
is good that you didn't do the integrations if you're not sure about your final setup, right? So you're already refining your tool stack. So that's certainly something that you realize the tools, you tested them, and you pick out what works best for you.
Yep.
But while you're in the migration process, looking into integrations as we teach in the Automation Like a Pro course, do things manually until you're so fed up of doing the recurring things that you really see that there is a need for an integration.
I would say that, and maybe it's different for everybody, I don't know, the almost prescriptive approach of start with this first and then go to this. My business is very similar to yours. What I teach people, how to do cloud data platforms and data warehousing and all of that. But one of the things I'm always having to do with my clients is there's all of this big picture, right? My frameworks look like ICOR in that way. And I'm like, you can't boil the ocean. Just focus here on this year, right?
Yeah.
And get good at this. And so having that starting place, I mean, I can relate to it because my clients go through this and I'm telling them to basically ignore 3/4 of the ICOR framework and say, just focus on your PKM, right? That's, that'll get you the most value. So having that, or like I mentioned before, very, while you and Paco talk about how you do daily routines and rituals and Sansama, right? There's 4 new concepts there. If you ever did a video to say, here's how to set up your daily and weekly routines. It's touched on in all the other videos, but one video to say, here's your Monday morning routine. It should be exactly this. Say, take this, implement this, because the biggest key for me is really developing the new habits. The Monday morning habit is still my old one. I'm still in Outlook, going through everything. I'm not, Outlook should be at the bottom of it.
Yeah, as you pointed out, with the focus on the PKM, for example, and you optimize this part, you already get a high efficiency boost. And the routines is really the thing that makes the things run on autopilot. So I totally understand that it might be hard to wrap your head around what should I actually put into these routines and then creating habits. It's just so many things to update and change that it makes no sense to try to do everything at once. So I see the routines, as we said, talked about the integrations earlier, that they make really sense when you have already somehow a running system, but you realize that you're forgetting things, for example, or that you have some shallow work that you have on a recurring basis to manage, and therefore you put this into routine. We avoid to make a specific list of routines, as even between Paco and me, it's widely different. What's the morning and the afternoon routine? So that's why we teach you how to fish and not serving you the fish on a silver platter. However, it's great feedback. So we will do more implementation in scenarios where we show our own setups to give more examples on that.
And that's where I mean, everybody will have their own routines for sure. And a lot of the new ones for me are about breaking old habits, so that's also the tricky part. But I think, with the 4 different parts of ICOR and then the satellites and things like that, for me or for anybody, right, figuring out where they should focus first and then turn that into, steps 1 through 4 and say, okay, just make PKM work,
Yeah.
Right now, I'm actually going to go back to your original. I think I struggle the most in the capturing beast, so I know that. I'm still trying to figure out, I just figured out how Tana capture is working. So I'm like, okay, that can replace how I do all these other captures. So I'm trying to change that habit to be just there. And then of course, reader is big for me because I'll clip at least 10 to 15 articles a day. Put it to a side and try to come back. But I haven't gotten to the step where I move the next step of being into Heptabase or something like that.
Yeah.
I have set up the kind of the basic My Life OS in Heptabase. I'm still scribbling on pages of note papers, everything that I could be setting up inside of Heptabase. So I'm focusing there. I would say one question I had, you had a video recently, a couple of videos, but I'm not quite sure what my takeaway should be, was the one point of capture, which is the freeform sketching. So quite often when you have an idea, because I'm listening to Slack or I'm listening to somebody else talk, I get an idea. I can visualize it in my head, like here's the concept as an image, not
Yeah.
an outline.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I'm writing it on a piece of paper, but it's like, how do I get that into my system? What's the capture? I'm all Apple ecosystem too. So, I'm like, okay, there's notes, but drawing on notes, every time I draw something, it converts it to text. And I'm like, maybe not that.
It comes all down to routines. That's sorry to say that, but you can control everything if you are aware of these different pieces. So a piece of paper, and what you just mentioned there as an example, is a perfect example for an intermediate note-taking step. So it's much easier to capture your thought on a piece of paper, or people using Apple Notes, Notability, or Remarkable, right, to scribble things very quickly down, but they will sit there forever if you're not processing them later. So there's even an advantage to make the intermediate step here, because by making it this way and then processing it into your even shallow thinking system, you already refine it by doing it. So, or you, if it is a picture, you just send a screenshot of this or you scan it into the thing. But therefore, you have to know what's the final destination. What is the single source of truth where I would look it up later? So the differentiation between capturing and retrieving can be complete different systems in the end. So I'm capture with one system, but when I retrieve the information, it's always in this system. And I have to be very strict about this, where I will find this. But for example, when I'm on the phone and I'm writing up quickly a phone number that I have to call after this call, right? But then I never need this phone number again. That's something I scribble down on a piece of paper or even in Apple Notes, and then I don't process it. So therefore, having these routines, which is just a checklist that reminds you of things that you still need to go through, check my Tana inbox, check my ClickUp inbox, right? That's things that are on my routine. Check to-do-ist, check what is on Slack. So therefore, I'm going through the different systems and just checking. In the morning, it's just planning out, is there anything that I need to work on later on or that needs to move into the action system?
And
And
that's
then
what I'm
I have a different routine in the afternoon where you then actually process these things in a different time slot, where it's not high intensity, high energy needed in order to process these inboxes. So I would never do this in the morning, for example, where you should focus on the deep work, where, for example, you then have the scientific papers that you saved and then say, okay, in the morning, I want to process 4 scientific papers, read through them, extract what is necessary, and move the extraction into my deep thinking system. So this is all could be part of a routine. So the routine is really there to keep you accountable.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm working through. So even yesterday I was on a hike and I got an idea about Tana, right? Actually, it was the Tana pricing on the new core, which I was like, wow, that looks amazing too. I was pretty impressed. So I opened up Tana Capture, I hit the voice recording, made up a little test, and it showed up in my Tana inbox this morning, which is great. So I'm working through, okay, there's voice. The one that I haven't figured out is when I sketch an idea real quick. Right.
Yeah.
And so trying to get away from the paper, I'm like, should I sketch? I was testing yesterday a sketch in Notability and then send to Tana. And how does that show up? Right. It's either JPEG or PDF or things like that. So I'm testing where my quick capture for, oh, I should draw this as a pyramid with 3 sections, right? Just that concept that goes to a project I'm working on in the deep thinking, but I want to capture that in the moment. So that's the only loose end in capturing beast I'm trying to figure out, is what's going to be the intermediate.
Well, there's where it becomes very important to replicate the same structure in all the different tools. So you have the capturing beast, and for those who don't know, well, you remember, I mean, my projects, key elements and topics. So that's what you mentioned you have in your deep thinking system. Having this in your shallow thinking system, that helps you then to quickly capture in the right spot. And therefore, when you want to work on this, you have 2 places where you go to. And even in Reader, which is a shallow thinking system for us, for example, people, they are having the same system set up as well. And you're using the tags in order to say, this is project XY or this is a topic XY. Therefore, you can very quickly capture things that you find on the web, but you have it already categorized into the relevant, or you gave it already the context. So when you go into your deep thinking system, you know, okay, now I need additional sources and I go to our other tools that I have for that. And therefore you have the same structure. That's why it's so crucial to replicate this. It doesn't mean that when you create it the first time in your deep thinking system, the structure, create a topic about something, that you have to go through other systems and create a topic there as well. That makes no sense at the moment you create it, because you don't know, do I actually need the other systems for that? There are situations where you just have it in your deep thinking, or there are situations where you have things just in shallow thinking. So therefore, only do it on the go. So when you realize, man, I'm collecting scientific papers about something that's in my deep thinking system, that's the moment you create the same entity in your shallow thinking system. So you know where to store it and then leverage the storage when the moment you go to the deep thinking system.
That I'm working on. I think for me, the latest updates with Tana, I'm trying to move that to be almost like where I spend all my day.
I mean, Tana is very powerful for all the meetings, for all the thoughts that come up, because it's so easy to store it in your today's page, as it doesn't matter, as it lives with the super tags, very easy to organize, well, at the speed of thought, as we say. But you mentioned it before, you mentioned Paco. How was it that you had two coaches in this inner circle coaching program instead of one, which is the typical situation?
I like having two perspectives on the same topic. There's two ways to say things, right? And Paco's experience is how he does things in work, running multiple companies. And so it's a different version of saying the same thing, which I do like. I was very equally, found value in your version of it and his version of it. So I think that's really good. Otherwise, right, it's your perspectives on how this works and how it works for you and things like that. But the more you hear of somebody else who's applied it in their life and their companies and things, you're like, oh, maybe it relates to different people. So I found that, some of what I do relates a lot to what you're doing. Some of it relates to how Paco's doing it. So it's actually a really good thing.
That's great. So how would you assess the return of investment for the Inner Circle program?
So what's funny, I think it's hugely valuable. There's no question. But I think the migration to working on this, that takes months, right? Because we're busy. It takes months to learn stuff and figure things out. I think that it's still a huge, huge value. But I'm still in the early stages of migration, which it's actually slowing me down a little bit. But I'm very committed to sticking it through because I know how much these processes are going to set up things to be more efficient. For me, being solo, I feel that I need these things in place and working, right? So that's my goal, is to get to that place and figure out what works for me. Certain components don't really apply, but then from there, I have processes I can actually scale my business. So in order to scale my business, I have to get through this, and I view it as it'll start out by me being 5 and 10x more efficient out of the bag. So that's step one, goal one. The second thing is then as I bring in more people into my company to help me, I can point them to ClickUp. I can point them to here. I can say, this is our SOP. This is how we do things, which in multiple attempts over the years, I haven't been able to scale like that. So the value is going to be huge. I'm still working through it. The inner core was 2 months ago. With being busy, right? You always are chipping away at it. And, I'm kind of in this, okay, now I'm in Q3. So I'm like, okay, my goals for, Q3 are to get certain parts of ICOR working in my business. And then Q4, I'll do the same thing. So we'll see. Early on migration, I think there's immediate value in the fact that I have confidence. I know there's a way. I'm not like the past years before I discovered paperless movement. I'm kind of swimming in the 1,000 different ways to do this, confusion, noise. To me, just having the confidence that I know the path forward is value. And then just working at it, and I'll get more value.
Well, that's great. So you mentioned the scaling with the team, right? So you had some employees before and now you're solo again. And that's absolutely the right step for sure, because it's, again, like the integration that we mentioned in the beginning. It makes only sense to make automations in a system if you really know how the system runs on paper, laying out the business processes and so on. And if you run on autopilot, then that's the moment where it's easy to scale. You can replicate this then for other people for sure. Because when you follow every day the same steps, then you know the steps that you have to do every day. And that's where the routines again come into play. Well, thank you very much. So I guess this means that you recommend the Inner Circle cohort to other busy professionals then.
No, absolutely, I do. There's no question. I recommend it. Like I said, I'm working through this as a way to also, take a more formal approach out in my industry to help. I work with enterprise data architects and chief data officers to say, here's how I use ICOR. Here's how you can replicate this for yourself and be productive. Because I know they have the same challenges. So it'll be a little tailored to my industry. But yeah, I'm looking for how do I actually carry what I've learned and bring it into other people's lives. So that's for sure.
Well, thank you very much, John.